Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey of the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China, and today we have a question from, oh, check out that cool octopus I drew. Anyway, we have a question from Roland Shu. I've got my notebook here because it's a long question. Had a lot of parts, so I had to write them all down so I wouldn't miss any. I'm going to address the fourth question he asked first because I'm just going to get that out of the way. He asks, in Bellator 198, there were submissions by Jiu-Jitsu athletes transitioning to MMA. Is this because of the level of Jiu-Jitsu in the sport or because of the low fighters' paychecks? Now, I didn't see Bellator 198. Haven't really followed Bellator in a while, to be honest. And I'm addressing this question first because I don't really understand it. I have got some questions about your question. So there were submissions, and I mean, did you think you were seeing some guys who were really good at jiu-jitsu fighting people who sucked at jiu-jitsu, and that's why we saw the submissions, or because there was a disparity in talent? I don't know. But here's the thing about submissions in MMA. Submissions are relatively rare in high-level professional mixed martial arts. We'll see them a lot more at the amateur level where people are still trying to figure out jiu-jitsu and wrestling and that sort of stuff. But in the UFC, the number is somewhere like 16, maybe 15, 16% of fights end via submission. Most MMA fights end via TKO. That's when one fighter can no longer intelligently defend himself and he is being beaten senseless and the referee jumps in there and stops it before it gets bad. Really bad anyway. So submissions are pretty rare, relatively speaking, and 50% of those submissions, over 50%, are the rear naked choke. Weird, right? Simple stuff works when push comes to shove. So let's go back to the first question. The first question our friend Roland asks is it better to be niche or well-rounded in MMA? Now, instead of saying niched, I would say specialized. Is it better to be a specialized fighter or a well-rounded fighter in the sport of mixed martial arts? He goes on to say, it seems like a lot of fighters learn one thing in depth, or maybe they train in everything, and when they compete, they use what they are best at. All right, that second assertion is correct. At the high level, all of these fighters in the UFC are well-rounded. They have to be. You cannot compete at that level without being well-rounded. You just can't. Right? If you're lacking in one of those skill sets, if you don't know how to wrestle, you're going to get killed. If you don't know jiu-jitsu, you're going to get killed. If you don't know how to box a little bit, you're going to get killed. If you don't understand the fundamentals of Muay Thai, you're going to get smashed in a cage fight. You have to understand the fundamentals. You have to be well-rounded. But at the same time, in order to stand out, in order to shine, in order to excel, you need to have specialized skill sets as well. Now, I'm not talking about being a master of a specific martial art or style that your opponent doesn't know. Okay, I'm talking about skill sets. It can be something as simple as having a deep understanding of a collar tie, for example, or your guard passing ability, right? Or your understanding of range and distance and timing. Okay, they can be really subtle. I'm working with a fighter right now. He's getting ready for his first pro fight. He's had a few amateur fights, and he's making that transition to the pros. But he's very well-rounded. But I would say his best skill sets are fighting at distance, his ranged fighting, right? Picking people off and landing combinations and clipping you on the chin and throwing kicks from outside the pocket, and his ground and pound, finishing fights via TKO on the ground, okay? And those are two almost polar opposite skill sets. But the specialization is the transition between the two, because mixed martial arts is all about the transitions in between separate skill sets. And that's where an MMA coach can really shine, is helping their athletes understand that transition. Now, I'm actually skipping ahead to the second question right here, which he asks, how do I tackle this issue in training? I'm telling you, we focus on the transitions in between the skill sets, okay? Connecting one thing you're good at with another thing you're good at, right? So he's really good at range fighting, fighting at distance and whatnot, okay? And that forces your opponent to move toward you, because otherwise they can't touch you, right? So they've got to come in, they've got to try to find angles and find a way in, okay? So as they're moving toward you, that's the best time to get under them, put them on the ground, then boom, 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 beat them up there, okay? So that's the specialization we're working on here. Now, when we're talking about specialization, again, you cannot afford to skip out on training on an important skill set like Jujitsu, wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, etc., right? If that's you, fix that and fix it quick. Right? Be a mixed martial artist. That means a guy who knows how to strike and a guy who knows how to grapple and a guy who knows how to put it all together. The third question, and this is interesting. What level of Jiu-Jitsu do you think there is in the UFC and Bellator? Okay. All levels of Jiu-Jitsu, man. Just about everybody in the UFC is a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu or black belt level. There's some exceptional grapplers in the UFC, and there are some guys who have a strong working understanding of grappling we don't often see because they're good at other stuff, better at other stuff. I mean, think about like Michael Page, Bellator fighter. Michael Venom Page. He's very famous for being a rangy distance karate fighter and throwing some cool spinning kicks and stuff from a distance and having these long, lanky punches and whatnot, picking people off at range, right? But he had a fight in India in the Super Fight League, and it ended up on the ground, and he submitted his opponent, made his opponent tap out, and everybody was shocked, like, what, the karate guy who can kick and punch so well knows some jiu-jitsu? Well, duh, of course he does. He's a professional mixed martial artist. You have to, right? You have to have those other skill sets so that if and when, because it is inevitable, eventually you will be put in one of those positions where you don't necessarily excel. So you have to have a working knowledge of those positions. Another great example, Anderson Silva, one of the most prolific strikers of all time in the UFC. Most of what we saw him do in the cage was strike, knock people out. But the casual fan might not know that he was also a jiu-jitsu black belt and a judo black belt, because we didn't see that stuff very often. There were a couple of times he got put on the ground, when he fought Chael Sonnen, when he fought Dan Henderson, and Anderson Silva was able to use his Brazilian jiu-jitsu to win those fights via submission. Now, submission fighting was not his plan A, because his striking was just so much better, right? And at the same time, there are black belts, and then there are black belts. Remember when Anderson Silva fought Damian Maia? And Damian Maia was on the ground basically saying, get in my guard, you're a black belt, aren't you? Let's do some jiu-jitsu. And Anderson Silva was like, nope, stand up and let's play my game. Why? Because there's a disparity there in the level of jiu-jitsu. It was not a smart idea for Anderson Silva to jump into the guard of, one of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the sport of MMA, right? Where his opponent stood a strong chance of winning via submission. So you got to play your strengths against your opponent's weakness. I mean, that is how we win MMA fights. We play our strengths against our opponent's weakness. The big limiting factor in mixed martial arts is time. Time limits our training. That's really that's it. Time limits your training. Now, there are a million different skill sets out there. There's no time to master them all. So, we must be very picky and choosy about how we use our time. We cannot become a specialist in everything. We must become a generalist in everything, but we can't become a specialist in everything. So, learn all you can. When you find that you gravitate toward a certain skill set and you find you get really good at something, better than the average person, yeah, use that. and work with your coach to develop a game plan to exploit that and to use it to its fullest. All right. Great set of questions. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.